Sophia ji, please go ahead.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of Yoga Insights. Today on Yoga Insights, we have Nea Ferrier joining us all the way from Dubai. She is the founder of Ashtanga Yoga Dubai, and she has been authorized to teach Ashtanga by Param Guru R. Sharat Joyce, and she is a level 2 authorized Ashtanga Yoga teacher. So Nea teaches daily in Dubai and she conducts workshops and retreats internationally as well. She's an avid student of yoga and has been practicing for over 20 years. Nea continues her studies in the darshans of Vedanta, Tantra, Ayurveda, and Veda chanting, alongside remaining a committed practitioner and teacher of Ashtanga Yoga. She is passionate about helping women connect to their menstrual cycles and is currently enrolled in the Menstruality Leadership Program with the Red School. So today we're going to have a 2-hour session with Nea, the first half of which will be a theory session. And after that, Nea is going to have a 1-hour workshop. So I hope you guys stick around because this is going to be a very special session. So let's welcome Nea to join us for this session. Namaste, Nea.
Namaste. Thank you so much, Sophia, for that introduction. And lovely that we can connect here. I think you're in Mysore at the moment, is that?
Yes, I am in Mysore, and thank you so much for doing this and being a part of Indica Yoga. So I'm going to hand over the session to you now, and I'll see you guys after the first hour when we're going to be opening for Q&A, and then that will be followed by the practical session. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I leave this to Nea now. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, this first session will be a lecture, and I have got some slides that I'll share, and then we'll move on to a practical session. Just a little further introduction of myself beyond my yoga credentials. Just so you know, I'm from Sydney originally, so I'm Australian, but I've been living away for around 20 years. I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong and Singapore and Japan, a lot of time in India, and then I settled in Dubai 10 years ago and started an Ashtanga yoga program here. And I also now have a larger yoga shala where we teach Ashtanga and Iyengar, Hatha, and I'm coming from that at the moment from the Lighthouse. So the objective today actually is to take a step closer to our menstrual cycle. And in fact, the very fact that you have registered for this workshop, that you're here online or you're watching this recording, means that you already have taken that step, and that obviously there was something in this workshop description that piqued your interest and you've put aside the time to look into this a little bit further. It's a big topic. I'm going to just go through a little bit of my journey of how I came to it, and then some of the learnings that I've had under the wonderful mentors at the Red School where I'm currently in training. And much of the work that I'm sharing today is from the Red School, and I'll be finishing with some resources that you can also follow up. So let me share my screen. Unmute the audio. Okay, sorry, I think it was muted for a moment. I'm just going to keep this like this because when I take it to the bigger screen, it changes the controls in my laptop. So these Sanskrit words actually come from a wonderful menstrual educator named Sinu Joseph, and I really recommend her book by the same name. And Viḍyā, this word you might be familiar with, it means knowledge, and specifically spiritual knowledge. And this is really important for what we're talking about today. And Ritu is the word for seasons. So when we talk about Viḍyā, it's the knowledge that comes from our menstrual cycle. And part of what I want to talk about today is that rather than seeing our cycle as firstly as something to ignore, secondly as something that's a hindrance, that in fact it's a doorway, a gateway into better understanding ourselves. And we could actually say the awareness of our cycle is a spiritual practice in itself. So it's seasonal wisdom that we learn through the connection and awareness of what's happening with our inner season. So you can see how much of a parallel this is with the yoga journey. We say that we come to yoga, we might come to yoga for many reasons in terms of getting greater health, mental stability and well-being. But we could say that really the bigger ultimate goal is that greater awareness, greater consciousness of our own self, our role in the world. So our yoga journey is a path of self-inquiry. And me, what I've experienced the last few years is my yoga practice coupled with menstrual cycle awareness has just really opened this doorway into a deeper understanding. So a deeper understanding of my own self, and also it is a path for healing, greater health and vitality. So we can see that our yoga practice is something that has those aims. And as women, we naturally have this cycle within us, which not only will deepen our yoga practice, but is, in a sense, we could even say is a yoga practice in itself. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So, as I said, it's a spiritual practice and it's also a self-care practice. So let me back up a little bit of the journey that I personally undertook that maybe some of you have also encountered in terms of your yoga. And firstly, as Sophia mentioned, I'm an Ashtanga yoga practitioner and teacher. I first went to Mysore in 2006 and have spent many months there over the years. I've made 12 individual trips studying at the institutes there, and now I teach this beautiful practice, which is a very dynamic, quite physically demanding at times practice, and it's a daily practice. We practice around 6 days. I personally now practice 5 days a week, but when I first started, it was a 6-day-a-week practice with 1 rest day. And what would happen is that we would also learn that we would rest on the moon days, on the full moon and new moon. And there were various reasons given for that, which I won't go into now, but I'm sure some of you yoga practitioners are familiar with the ebbs and flows of the moon. And what, as women, I started realizing was that, quite often that my inner moon, my menstrual cycle would line up either with the new moon or full moon. So then that would make sense to then rest on those days. And we were also instructed to take 3 days rest from our physical asana practice. Now, this is where a little bit of the confusion, I think, over time has come in. Because either 2 things would happen. Somebody would feel like they didn't want to take the rest because they felt, I feel fine doing, there's no problem and I don't want to miss out on my practice. Other times people might think this is something patriarchal, sexist, or maybe for myself as being a Westerner traveling to India, what was the connection with cultural taboos surrounding menstruation? So in some cases, many women would think I'm not going to take this rest during the time of my menstruation. I personally always did because I'm maybe a little bit naturally lazy and I just enjoyed taking that rest. But what I did find was that there was a little bit of a missing link in how it was explained as to why we wouldn't take the rest. And it's only been in the recent years of my sort of exploration in this work and looking at some other sources outside of my small Ashtanga world that I started understanding a little bit deeper as to why would we be wanting to take a rest from quite a physically demanding asana practice. So some of you watching this now, I'm not sure of your background. Maybe you are not an Ashtanga yoga practitioner, but you might be practicing a style of yoga that has its origins in Ashtanga yoga, or you might be practicing a Hatha yoga practice, which also involves inversions, bandhas, and other techniques, which is suggested not advisable at the time of menstruation. And sometimes we're just told, don't do it. And if you're kind of an independent woman, being told not to do something sometimes makes you just want to go and do it. And because of the lack of explanation, and also when we're talking about this, and it's almost, if you think about in Ayurveda, effects come slowly and subtly. It's not that something will happen immediately and you'll be able to see the immediate cause and effect and make the link. So that leads me on to then talking about what we're working with and how we look at the body when practicing yoga. And sometimes this gets a little bit missed. I think I, obviously teach in the West, where a lot of yoga has been, just talked about in terms of what's happening with the muscles and the joints, and you do this posture for opening the hamstrings or this posture for opening the shoulders. And we're forgetting a little bit about the more subtle aspects of the yoga practice, essentially what makes yoga yoga. And of course, this would be working with prana. So we have the overall concept of prana, which is our life force. And we know that prana is something that we can actually cultivate through effective yoga practices, breathing practices, through being in nature, the food we eat. And then we have the subset of pranas. And we have prana again is used as that subset. We've got sort of the master prana, and then we've got these 5 vayus. So we have prana, which is this upward moving force. And then we have, and I'm only going to talk about 2 today. I've got 5 here, but it's 2 that are particularly relevant. And a lot of the yoga practices we do in terms of using bandhas and breathing is this upward movement of prana towards the chakras, which are in the upper part of the body. And then we have the downward movement of prana, known as apana. So we know in Sanskrit, when we put an A in front of something, it becomes the opposite. And downward moving prana is what governs everything that moves down, which would be childbirth, defecation, urination, and menstruation. So this is a really important concept to be aware of, and it's probably something that you've already known of, but maybe not necessarily put into the context of what we're doing when we practice yoga during the different stages of our cycle. So I'll overlay now a little bit more depth in terms of this, the upward moving prana. So if you practice Ashtanga yoga and other forms of Hatha yoga, there is the concept of the bandhas, which is an energetic lock, seal, but it's actually we say an energetic lock in the sense that it's moving prana, but it's a very physical action of the lifting in the pelvic floor, Mula Bandha, the drawing in of the lower abdomen, Viḍyā Bandha, and I'll leave out the Jalahara Bandha because that's only practicing pranayama, but just these 2, Mula Bandha and Viḍyā Bandha. Now, suddenly when we look at this, I like this image because it's quite clear. We think, is that the direction of movement? You can see it's very upward, very inward, prana moving upward, that I want to be cultivating at the time of menstruation. Well, actually not, because at the time of menstruation, we want to focus on apana. the downward flow of prana. So if we take a big step back and look at what are we actually doing with our yoga practice? Our yoga practice is designed to, aside what I mentioned, greater consciousness, awareness, ultimate moksha, liberation, but ultimately we want the systems in our body to be working in harmony, to be working as they should. And a healthy menstrual cycle is one of the key measures of health of a woman. So if we're doing something that is maybe going to hinder or work against that natural harmony, that doesn't really seem to be a sensible direction to move in. So then this gives us a little bit of an entry point. Now, this is what happened for me to then realize, okay, let's take this rest time seriously and rest from these dynamic forms of practice. And what's important, and that's why this second half is going to be a practical session, because it's not necessarily that we have to rest from yoga per se, but maybe just rest from some practices that are not supportive of what is happening with the body at the time of menstruation. So in the second half, we're going to look at some restorative yoga practices, which actually cultivate and emphasize apana, the downward flow. This idea of withdrawing in and taking rest opens up a whole concept and a way of understanding our menstrual cycle, that it's more than just the time of menstruation. We have a changing flow of energy that's happening throughout that month. And back to the moon cycle, one of the reasons why the women menstruate on the time of the moon is quite often that our cycle is linked up with the moon, and this similar concept of the waxing of the moon, the expansion concept, and the waning of the moon. For a long time, I feel that without this understanding as women, sometimes we can feel like there's something wrong with us, because we go through the month, the period time of the month where we have a more positive mindset, a more expansive feeling, like we want to be meeting our friends, being productive, doing lots of things. And then there comes a time where we're not feeling that. We feel like we want to withdraw a little bit. We're not feeling as productive. Now, because of our, I guess, modern capitalist society, we're used to thinking that we need to be operating like this all the time. That's not actually how things work. We have ebbs and flows of energy. And a great way to really observe this is with your daily practice. So for years, I would have my daily practice, and it was a real benchmark to check in and see how I was feeling. And there'd be times where I felt super energetic and doing lots of jump backs, and it was very easy to jump on the mat. And other times where I felt not as enthusiastic, and I would judge myself on those times and think that the expansive, energetic one was positive, and the feeling not so great was negative. Now, when we look at the cycle in a holistic way and see that these states are very, very natural, they're inbuilt in the woman, and it's actually not something to be fearful of or to not appreciate, that they actually, if understood correctly, can become our superpower. So I'm going to go through this concept of the cycle as seasons, and this work comes from the Red School, from the book Wild Power. So I really recommend this book if you're interested in. I do want to say that this is not the same as, this is not an Ayurvedic concept. So there is that you can learn about the menstrual cycle in terms of Ayurveda, what's happening with the body in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And it's not the same as this, because in Ayurveda, the time of menstruation is actually extra heat. And so it's labeled as summer. Okay, so there are different methodologies for looking at the cycle. The one that I'm using is not connected to Ayurveda in this aspect in terms of the seasons. So with this methodology and lens that we can use to better understand our cycle, the time of menstruation is talked about in terms of a winter. And it's a little bit tricky sometimes teaching this, especially in Dubai, because we don't really have seasons. But if you imagine, when I lived in Japan, they love the seasons, and they talk a lot about the differences between the different seasons. So if you just imagine that you live somewhere that has these seasons, if you don't live somewhere like that. So what happens in winter? In winter, we withdraw in. It's a quieter time. If you think about what animals do, it's a hibernation. So we can think about how at the time of menstruation, that could be a feeling that you actually have within you, but haven't really been able to honor because of not giving yourself the space or allowing for that because of work commitments, family commitments, yoga commitments, feeling like you have to do this particular practice, even though I have my periods. And to be honest, this is the prevailing culture in our society, that no need for rest, carry on. You can even see menstrual products are advertised in this way. Forget about resting. We've got this pad or the tampon that will, help you continue doing. You don't have to take a rest. You can just continue everything that you've always done before. But quite often, what we actually would quite like to do is have a little bit of time by ourselves, a little bit of quiet, and a little bit of rest. So, if we look at in terms of the seasons, what happens in winter? There is a decay. There is a breakdown. There is almost like it's like a mini death. And as we know in the cycle of life, there can't be life without death. We can't have spring without winter. So if we actually do take the time to, and it's a lovely concept, the idea of even just a 1%, even if that meant just that one morning when the blood comes, to have a little bit of a sleep in or take a little time, extra time for yourself that day. The ultimate actually is to be able to say, that's it, I'm not doing any housework today. Husband or wife has to get dinner. That's something to sort of build up to. But we could say as yoga practitioners, at least taking a rest for the dynamic style of practice that we might be doing throughout the rest of the month. And we might do that for a couple of days. And what will happen as the blood finishes, we move into this beautiful spring phase. So you may have already noticed this in yourself, that you'll have times when you feel extra optimistic. Ideas are coming. You're looking at the world and seeing the potential. This is our springtime. So we can really just visualize what's happening at spring. The little buds are coming on the tree, the cherry blossoms are opening. It's a beautiful time. And if we think about it in terms of the moon, if we say menstruating on the new moon, and then that moon is starting to come and grow into its fullness. So this is pre-ovulation, and it's the time in the cycle to plan, to be inspired, to think of new ideas, do extra journaling. So when we have this knowledge, it's very, very helpful, because you can actually think about syncing your calendar, your rest of your life, to these different seasons. I'll talk about that a bit more. So our moon is waxing, it's growing, we're coming up to full moon. And I will say that not everyone menstruates on the full moon, new moon. Sometimes people switch between. But we'll just take this as a symbol, the full moon and the peak of summer. So what's happening actually physiologically in the body is the time of ovulation. And this is actually the time of the month where we feel the most expansive energy in terms of being maybe the most social. If you might even notice marital relations, you might notice, sorry, let me just. Okay. You might notice that that is the time where you feel like your husband is being the sweetest, and I tell you, it's a very good time to plan date night, would be around this time. And it's when we're in peak productivity. So this aspect of the cycle is probably the part that our prevailing culture and society honors the most. And it's often the full summer is when we like it ourselves the most, because we consider being productive and all these things, you know, the ultimate, you know, way of using our time. But what it's important to recognize is that all these aspects of our cycle, whether it's winter, spring, peak summer, or what we're going to move into now, autumn, are all valid. And once we have that understanding, it really leads to greater self-acceptance and can actually be extremely healing, particularly when we come into this autumn stage. So just like in peak summer, there comes a time where naturally the leaves on the trees start falling. We're preparing for winter. This autumn period is the period that is considered in our society maybe the most problematic, and so much so that we've even put a term for it. We call women in this period, we say we're having PMS, because you might feel extra irritable. Depression can creep in. And the reason for this is this is when what is known as the inner critic comes the strongest. So you might notice that, you know, why is it at certain times that voice in the head, that critical voice just becomes louder? And quite often it's during this autumn period, this lead up to the period. The beauty of this wisdom is when you can recognize something and see it for what it is, it diminishes its hold and its intensity. So when you're able to have that self-awareness, and this is what our yoga practice teaches us, is to be able to see what is happening, see those thoughts in the mind and recognize, this is my inner critic. This is my autumn period. I see it for what it is. And just taking that little step away, we were able to just see the thoughts and realize that we are not the thoughts. But sometimes this inner critic or this autumn period can actually be one of the most powerful times of our cycle, because it's when we often speak our truth. Now, this can sometimes cause us problems if we haven't learned how to harness the power of this truth speaking, and it just sort of all comes out. And that's why, you know, this autumn, this wise woman time is, you know, sometimes looked back down upon in our society, because we want everyone to be, you know, nice girls, where this time is when the woman speaks the truth. And sometimes that inner critic might have truths that you also need to listen to. And sometimes she might have wisdom that you need to be, you know, standing up in your power and sharing with others. So it's a very powerful time that needs a lot of self-awareness to manage. And then, of course, we have the physical symptoms that can take place at the time of menstruation, the very unpleasant physical symptoms that many women may suffer. And these might be during this period in terms of water retention or pain, migraines. That's something I suffered with. So one of the things that can happen from forming a relationship with your cycle and the way, and I'm going to talk about how we do that in the next slide, is many women have found some of these physical symptoms have been alleviated. And we could say maybe the reason for this is paying attention to something is a way of giving something love. When you pay attention to a child, a pet, a plant, you're putting your attention there, and that's a form of love. And then that child and that pet does not need to be screaming and jumping up and down and saying, hey, hey, I need your attention. So this can be one of the effects of forming this relationship and observing the cycle, and particularly honoring the time of the bleed and allowing for rest, that physical symptoms can alleviate. And this may take a couple of months, it may take a couple of years, but it is a journey that many women have been on, from mild pain to very, very, very severe pain, healing from that. So we come around to autumn, and we're back at our winter. And what will happen is that if you have managed to honor the different aspects of your cycle throughout the different seasons, the menstruation at that time is a really good indicator of how the month has gone. So there's a book for those who are interested in the more scientific approach. There's a book called The Fifth Element, the Fifth Vital Sign, which talks about how menstrual blood, and this is talked about in depth in Sinu Joseph's book as well, is a great indicator of whether you have pain, the color of the blood, and all these different factors are a sign of the health of the body. And we can actually be almost using it like a diagnostic tool. So I personally myself have noticed that there'll be times where the time of winter, I might have more physical symptoms, perhaps maybe a premenstrual migraine or maybe some pain. And that would be quite closely connected to how well I was able to honor the cycle the month before. So it's a very, very powerful journey to be on in terms of I see it as it's the ultimate in self-care. Because if we, people talk a lot about self-care now, and it's like hashtag self-care and gone to go get a massage or something, but get your nails done. But really, self-care is being able to know what, have that introperception, an understanding of what's happening with you somatically, and how to give yourself the care, the space that is needed at these different times, and to understand and have that acceptance that it is a cycle. And this is very, very useful this time, particularly if you suffer with that inner critic in that autumn period, to know this is just at this time, this will change. In fact, the winter will come. I'll take as much, rest and time for myself as possible, and then the spring will come. And from what my experience, and also the students of mine that have been on this journey with me the last few years, is that the greater rest that's taken at that time of menstruation, and it doesn't necessarily mean, I'm not meaning that you have to be lying in bed, but in terms of rest from a dynamic yoga practice, and maybe doing some other practices like restorative sequences, meditation, journaling, just being in stillness, then the greater the intensity of the feeling of renewal in that spring period comes. And that's a wonderful feeling, because we're not meant to feel the same all the time. And I think women have been made to think that there's something wrong with them where it's the absolute contrary. This is absolutely our superpower, that we have these inner seasons that we can work with. So how do we start this journey? So the core to forming a relationship is cycle awareness. And that involves starting a little diary. And this is what I did 5 years ago now, and started a big journey. Was just each day to record the energy levels, the moods, how you're feeling in the physical body. And that lines up with the stages of the cycle. So day 1 is the first day of the bleed. So if you had some spotting the day before, that's not day 1. Day 1 is the first day of the bleed. And day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. So writing it out, and your cycle might vary in length. And the big sort of, from the red school, they say the big red rule is, while there is this concept of the inner seasons, the part of this journey is you really documenting it and exploring it for yourself and your own relationship to your own cycle. That's the only way you can be really honoring what's happening in your own body. So this is a worthwhile practice to do for at least a couple of months. In fact, it ends up becoming, for me now, it is actually almost like my sadhana. So if you think of a sadhana as being a daily spiritual practice, it's something you do every day. My cycle awareness, checking in and seeing where I am in my cycle, which part of spring, autumn, winter, which day I'm in, what I'm experiencing. It's a daily practice. Once you have that information, after a couple of months, some patterns will normally emerge, and you'll be able to notice these changing ebbs and flows of energy and moods. The next wonderful stage, and this is where the superpower is to, if possible, sync your calendar. So as yoga practitioners, it would be, okay, I know my period is coming, so I know on those days I'll do different practices. But it might even be that if you know that the few days before the cycle, for me personally, actually the time of menstruation is, I'm actually have a big release and I feel very connected. And I would like to point that out, actually, that there is work by a woman, another resource, and I'll give you these at the end, called Uma Dinsmore Tully. She's written a book called Yoni Shakti. And I also just heard this recently from a teacher that was visiting Dubai, Eddie Stern, about there are lineages of yoga, probably from a long time ago, where it was believed that a lot of the kriyas and the hatha yoga practices that were given for men were things that they were needing to do to come into an alignment that women just naturally had. And Uma Dinsmore Tully actually talks about, at the time of ovulation and menstruation, and people have written about this feeling of, ecstasy and bliss, that's actually when the Sushumna Nadi is just naturally open. And the time of menstruation, if the negative physical symptoms can be minimized, then definitely it can be a time of greater intuition, dreams, feeling of alignment, and just feeling of love. So for me personally, I have that's kind of the feeling in the time of menstruation, but it's the week before that is. And it was actually quite funny because this workshop was actually scheduled for last week, which was just the day before I started my cycle on Saturday. And this workshop was originally scheduled Friday, and I had a whole full day of teaching And at that time in my cycle, just before my periods, the thought of doing that was just, I just couldn't imagine it. And then Sophia sent me the message saying, would it be okay if we reschedule? And I was so absolutely relieved. And it can be like that. It can be one time of the month, you know, in that peak summertime, absolutely no problem. I can teach, you know, 6 hours straight. But this time in the inner autumn, the feeling of overwhelm is very strong. And it just felt like, oh, so I was I had to thank the universe for that alignment. But this can happen actually. This cycle awareness practice is very powerful. It brings you into an alignment, and there can be some real magical alchemy that goes on. And I think that was a nice example. So if possible, you're able to sync your calendar, trusting the stages. So trusting, knowing that, okay, this stage might be difficult, but I'm going to pass through it, or, you know, really seeing how it is taking hold in your life. And then this is probably the most challenging one, and it may take a little while before you're able to do this, which is really honoring it in the world. So I look forward to a time as this knowledge and this wisdom becomes more widespread, that, you know, you're able to very openly say, you know, to friends or to family, you know, I'm going to rest because I'm at this stage in my cycle, and that's just, you know, a conversation that is able to happen with pride and no shame. So we're getting there. So it's because of people like you that have joined workshops like this that we're moving towards a world like that. So, and the practice for yoga practitioners, it means adapting our practice. Okay, recognizing that we don't need to do the same practices every day. Well, we might do similar practices, but the way we do them can adjust. So for my Ashtanga practice, I will adjust the way I practice. In the spring and summer, I'll have much more intensity, much more dynamism. The lead up to menstruation, I'll really feel like that sort of drawing in and start, you know, just softening, even a little bit more, modifying if there's any breast swelling or abdomen swelling, and not feeling bad about that in any way. And in fact, really what it is, it's the use of Viḍyā, a discerning mind, making the right decisions for you, for your practice at the right time. And for women, I think this menstrual cycle awareness is a key way for us to develop and tap into our Viḍyā, the higher self, the higher consciousness, that discerning mind that can make these wise, intelligent decisions that are going to support us, rather than having the practice, you know, drain us in any way. So we're going to do a restorative practice. And when we talk about restorative yoga, this tradition really does come from Iyengar yoga. So if you go to an Iyengar yoga class, there'll always be a section of the class which involves restorative postures. And if you want to learn more about restorative yoga, I would recommend Judith Lassiter-Hansen, who was originally a student of BKS Iyengar, and she's really gone on to develop restorative yoga as a practice within itself. It's different to yin. In yin, it's the same concept of holding the postures for a period of time, but in yin, that you're always trying to do something. So there'll always be a little yang within the yin, stretch, which feeling like, oh, we're targeting here and there. In the restorative, we're using props, so you're completely supported, and then you can completely let go. And if you're used to doing a dynamic practice, it's the opposite of that. In the dynamic practice, there's a lot of doing, and in our restorative practice, there's just a lot of being. And we want the environment to be warm, so you want to have like a blanket with you. Dark, if you can't darken the room, cover the eyes, and ultimately quiet. So if you think about that concept of menstruation in time of winter, and naturally, you know, many people feel like at the time of the first day in particular, maybe a bleed, that you just would like to get into the bed and pull the covers up over you. So this is a yoga practice that gives you that same feeling. Here are some useful resources. The methodology that I'm talking about comes from the Red School and their pivotal book, Wild Power. Now, they have written another book called Wise Power. So I'd like to also add, for some women, it might be actually coming into the time of leading up towards menopause and not many cycles left. It is possible to keep practicing cycle awareness once the menstrual cycle is finished using the moons. So you would notice, and at that time in life, the woman is actually much more probably connected to the moon, the outer moon energy than the inner moon energy, right? So they have in the second book, I haven't got it here, but it's called Wise Power. So if you're entering perimenopause or menopause, then I recommend that book for you. Sinu Joseph, she's from Kerala, and wonderful book, Viḍyā, and this is really, really relevant if you are living in India and have grown up hearing about a lot of the cultural taboos around menstruation. Sinu explains a lot of these things in terms of the lens and the perspective of Ayurveda. She talks about why you wouldn't go into the temple, not necessarily because of the cleanliness, but actually because of the vibrational quality of that temple and how it can affect prana. So I started the talk with talking about how our yoga practice can affect prana, but of course there are other vibrational things. For example, I don't do my chanting practice at the time of menstruation because I can feel when I do my chanting practice this upward movement. There are some chants I do where I can feel down, but there are certain ones that I personally leave out. And then there's the Yoni Shakti book, which is very, very interesting because it's Umadin Motuli's her theory, but it's a very interesting one. It's a methodology she developed to look at the stages of the cycle and connect them to the Maha Vidyas, to the wisdom goddesses. So that's really fascinating and very useful from that perspective of accepting all aspects of our psyche. And of course, that's what those wisdom goddesses do so beautifully, because you have, you know, beautiful Lakshmi, which we could say, you know, is in the spring and the summer. And then, you know, you have the Durgamati and Chinma, Master and Kali, who you might be more reflective of that time of the autumn and the winter aspect of our psyche. And all of those in the women are valid, and that's what makes us women, right? Okay, so I'll just pause here now, and we're going to start an actual restorative yoga practice. But before we do, I'll turn over to Sophia, who can host. We'll just do a couple of questions now, because after the restorative practice, you'll feel nice and relaxed and rested, and you don't need to talk. I prefer it if you don't talk after the restorative. You just go to sleep or go and have your dinner.
Thank you so much, Nia. That was, sorry, that was so in-depth and relevant. And, you know, I really like what you said towards the end about how the universe just aligns to our needs when one practices spirituality, when one practices, whether it's Ashtanga, pranayama, meditation, you start to notice these subtle changes, these small little things just happening to work out for you. It's really beautiful how that happens. And especially for women, we have so much power within us, and especially with our cycle. So it's so refreshing to have women talk about these things so freely, so openly, and with so much positivity. So thank you so much for that Lovely presentation. We already have 2 questions. The first, it's from the same person. Yes, the recording will be shared. Not for a limited time. It's going to be on the Indica Yoga YouTube channel, as well as the Indica Yoga social media pages and our website. And what was the name of the book, the non-Ayurvedic book you mentioned?
Yes, Wild Power. And I'll send a list of books to you that you can put in the email out to everyone if you like.
That would be wonderful. So if you guys have any more questions, now's the time to ask, because we won't be taking any questions towards the end of the session. Or if you come up with questions, then maybe you can email those to us later, and we can always forward the questions to Nea, because I think we should start, or we have another one. Pranjali Ji is asking, can you throw some light on PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or what is also known as intense PMS. She has been experiencing yoga and meditation, practicing yoga and meditation regularly and journaling too, but is not able to deal with this.
Yeah. Start the cycle awareness practice. Start that, as in the diary, day 1, day 2, day 3, and do this for a number of months.
Okay, so I hope that helps you, Pranjali. Plus also the practice you're now doing might be a good idea to start doing that as well. So if we don't have any, we want to take them, I'll hand the session back to you, Nea, then to start the practice.
Can you just give a time check, because I'm looking at my clock, it's a different time.
We have an hour-ish.
Yeah, perfect. So what I'm going to suggest is I'm going to be using a bolster, 2 blocks, and a blanket. Now, if you're at home and you don't have these props, just go to your pillow or your couch or your bed and get as many pillows and blankets and things. And the great thing about the restorative practice is it's really different for each person. So somebody needs 2 pillows, somebody needs 1 pillow. I can't see you. So normally when I teach restorative yoga, I go around the class and I look at how the props are done, and they suggest, maybe you'd like a pillow here and a pillow there. But I will just have to trust that you're setting yourselves up in a comfortable way. And it needs to be more than just comfortable. And this is a big shift actually in our mentality, because the practice that I teach Monday to Sunday is the complete opposite idea. We basically make ourselves uncomfortable and then try and be comfortable, right? That's kind of the premise of Ashtanga yoga. We tie ourselves up in knots. It's not feeling that comfortable, but I use my breath to come into a state of steadiness. So I'm learning how to be okay with not being okay, which is a very useful thing to learn, very useful. That is not what we're doing in our restorative practice. It's not enough to feel like, I feel fine. I mean, there's a niggle in my back and I probably need something under my head, but this will fine. I'll just grin and bear it. So we don't want that. We want to take our time, get the setup, really, so we're just feeling able to just let go. There's a feeling of being supported and held by the earth, by the props. So the first one we'll do, and we're going to do a whole little sequence that is loosely based actually on the Iyengar Yoga menstrual cycle sequence. Another resource is the Iyengar Yoga Gems for Women book by Geeta Iyengar. And I will say this, that probably the Iyengar tradition is one that has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to sequences for women premenstrual, during menstruation, specific asanas for that. So that could be something, if you are looking for further support, to seek out a great Iyengar yoga teacher who's got a lot of knowledge in those asanas. So this is a sequence that I teach my Ashtanga yoga students. So we have the Mysore class, and people are doing their own self-practice, and most people are doing the dynamic practice. And then during menstruation, I have women do this restorative practice. Well, I'm using blocks to basically put the bolster on an angle. But you could just use 2 pillows on top of each other. This is also a very useful posture if you have had, and this is quite relevant post-COVID, if you've had any respiratory illness and you need to, and any flu or cold-like symptoms, and rather than doing Shavasana lying on your back, you can elevate your chest to help with draining out the fluid. Have something to go underneath the head. So we're going to come into the Supta Baddha Konasana, which means bringing the soles of the feet together, lying back, and make sure you put your sacrum right at the edge. You don't want to have a gap there. That needs to be nice and supported. And lying back into this position. Now, this is not necessarily comfortable for everyone. So what you are going to do, if you feel like there's too big a stretch happening here, we're not trying to stretch, we're going to be supported, then you would get 2 pillows or blankets or mats and put them and wedge them under the legs. I'll show you how you would do that. Because this first one, you can stay in it up to 20 minutes. We won't today, we'll stay for 10 minutes. So this feels really nice for me to have my thighs supported. The other advantage is I can also rest my wrist on this. And it's quite a nice feeling actually to have the elbow off the ground and wrist slightly higher than the elbows. When we position the head, you want to have your forehead above your chin. It's not very pleasant for the nervous system to let the head drop back. So have your forehead slightly above the chin. We settle on in. If you have a scarf or an eye pillow, just something to cover the eyes, we'll do so. As you settle on into the posture, you do a little scan of the body. So feeling where the feet are connecting to the floor. Feeling the heaviness of the shin bones. Feeling the heaviness of the thigh bones. Let the bones drop to the floor. Feel the heaviness of the pelvis. Soften the buttocks. Soften the belly. Relax the chest. Notice the gentle rising and falling of the upper abdomen with the breath. Feel the heavy hands dropping onto the pillows. Heavy forearms. Upper arms. Feel the shoulders rolling back, opening the chest. Soften the muscles at the front and the back of the neck. Relax the scalp. Soften the space between the eyebrows. Breathe into the cheeks. Just let the whole body be heavy. Bring your awareness back onto your breath. Take 3 conscious breaths. Gently moving the fingers and toes. And slowly making your way up to the seated position. With that Supta Baddha Konasana, you can do for around 20 minutes. And maybe you only have time for that posture, and that would be absolutely fine. Just to carve out 20 minutes of being in stillness, letting yourself have that time of rest. And it does take about 20 minutes to really drop down into that parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response. So we'll continue on and we'll keep this same setup. And we're going to now come into a supported child's posture. So the knees will be apart. If you have a tenderness of the ankle joint, you could put something underneath the ankles. And if you have any tenderness in the knees, you can also take the blanket here. We come forward and resting. Now, for me personally, I feel like I need a little bit of extra height. So if you had some extra pillows you wanted to add, some people like being lower, so I'm going to get an extra bolster. Placing it here. And there's a few options for the hands. You could have the hands resting on the floor. You can also tuck them under here. And at the time of menstruation, it can also feel quite nice to make fists and to be tucking them in and holding there as well. So the head you can have turned to one side, or you can support and place a pillow to keep the neck straight. So you're lifting your forehead so you have space for your nose. So coming into a position that's comfortable for you. And we'll settle in here for 3 to 5 minutes. Take 3 last conscious breaths, breathing into the back of the body, directing the breath to the back of the chest, the sides of the rib cage. And then slowly sitting up. And we'll continue with this same theme of forward bending. So you'll find in the restorative sequence for menstrual, the time of menstruation, there's a lot of forward bends because it's alleviating for stretching out the lower back, but also more importantly, energetically, the forward bending tends to be more calming to the nervous system. So we're going to do a Janusasana. So bending in the right leg, the left leg stretched out, coming nice and close. You're going to get this bolster in close towards the lower abdomen. And with this knee, if it's not feeling comfortable coming down, then have something on the side to be able to prop that so you're not feeling like a big stretch. And some people might also like to place a blanket. This is why you need lots of blankets and pillows around you if you've got them, underneath your sitting bones, just to help with tilting that pelvis forward. And if this is too far and you're feeling too big a stretch on the leg, there will be a little bit of a stretch, but that's not the purpose of the posture. So don't feel like you have to be enduring painful back leg. And you can add some more height when we come forward. And then move that, maybe set up a little bit different. We'll have a couple of minutes on this. A variation to this could also be if you don't have these bolsters and pillows at home and you have a couch or a chair, you can also just have the legs crossed and lean forward, resting your head on the couch and chair. It's just a very nice option. Gives a little stretch to the lower back, just brings you into a calming position. slowly sit up and stretch the leg out, give a gentle shake to the leg, and then changing sides. These ones we just stay for 2 to 3 minutes each on each side. And coming forward again. Slowly sitting up, releasing the leg. Now we can take both legs out straight, or if it also feels comfortable, you can make like a diamond shape with legs coming forward. Similarly, if you're not able to go onto the bolsters and you're just by a couch, you can rest the head on the couch. Okay, slowly sitting up. So we'll actually dismantle this, put all the props to the side. Move the blocks, that blocks. We're going to do a very gentle spinal extension. It's a supported Setu Dandasana. So take your bolster in the center of the mat, if you have one, otherwise just a big pillow. And you can have a blanket opened out. I've also got a strap. Now, if you're at home and you don't have a strap, you can just use a scarf, any soft piece of fabric. You're not using the strap too intensely. I'm going to lie back on here, sit in the middle, and my brow line will come at the edge of the bolster. So my shoulders and neck are on the floor. And I stretch the legs out, and I'm going to bring my arms into like a cactus position. So it's a very gentle lengthening of around the abdomen area that can feel quite a nice sensation during this time. The reason why I have this strap is just by tying it, it actually feels better than having to try and hold my legs on the bolster. So I can just do a little gentle tie, and then I can just relax my legs. Now, I'm actually starting to feel a little bit cold here. So I've got a blanket I'm going to use to cover my feet. It's nice, often keeping the extremities warm. Even when I lie back on this blanket, sometimes I can even fold the blanket over my hands, and that feels nice too. So we lie back. This is going to feel a little more energizing than the last postures, because of being the front opening, and the diaphragm naturally releases and frees up the brain. In the restorative practice, let your breath be whatever it wants to be. You need to take some deep breaths and sighs, let yourself do that, or let it just settle down to soft, natural breathing. Take 3 last deep breaths. Roll over onto your side. Coming and sitting up, and we'll move into the final rest posture. And I'm going to suggest today, rather than the normal Shavasana lying on the back, that we do the side Shavasana. This can feel very nice during this time. So have a blanket or a pillow to go underneath the head. And you're going to have the bottom leg straight, the top leg is bent, and rest that on the bolster. Sometimes if the angle is too great and you feel like you want some additional support, you can also take a blanket here. I quite like that feeling. And have the head supported coming into the final rest. Now, ideally, you might have a blanket here, you can pull over, closing the eyes. Of course, this is optional if you have your favorite resting position. Another option is also taking the bolster, putting it underneath the legs, can feel very nice in the lower back, and lying back. You're welcome to come into that as well. Gently moving fingers and toes. Bend the knees. If they're not already bent, roll onto the side if you're not already on your side. Slowly coming and sitting up. Coming and sitting in a comfortable cross-legged position. Sometimes it can feel nice to elevate the hips. So coming and sitting on a blanket or a bolster. The thighs should be parallel or slightly lower than the hips to find a comfortable position. The spine is tall. Let's have a few moments with the eyes closed. And the feeling that we want to cultivate for ourselves at this time in our restorative practice, when we're slowing down and during the time of menstruation, it's really like we're enveloping ourselves with a big hug. Feeling like someone is holding us. Feeling that support, that beautiful sensation of being held, supported. Almost like we're in a big cosmic room. And in fact, the yantra that happens to be behind me is the yantra. Zoom out, see the full one. The Bhuvaneshwari, who is one of the wisdom goddesses, who represents space. It's within her arms the universe and the world is held. So if we can have that feeling in these last final minutes, just sitting and feeling like someone is enveloping you with their arms, holding you in tenderness. Supporting you, allowing you to just be, allowing you to come into deep rest. Bring the mind's awareness to the heart center. Cultivating a feeling of warmth, light, and tenderness and loving kindness towards oneself. And then bring the palms together. Gently bow the head. Thank you, and thank yourself for making time for this important topic of menstrual cycle awareness and taking time for a restorative yoga practice. And I hope you can move that one little step closer towards the relationship with your cycle. And for some people, that might seem very far off if you're experiencing pain or discomfort or negative things connected to the cycle. But start the process, even if it's just one little thing that you do. Maybe it can start with just adjusting the yoga practices needed, taking a little bit of rest during that time and see what unfolds. Okay, so thank you very much to Viḍyā and Indica Yoga for hosting this workshop, and I'll close there today. Thank you.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much, Nea. That was such a relaxing session. I mean, I understand that it's for your cycle and whatnot, but it's just such a relaxing practice to do anyway, even if you're not going through your menstrual phase. And at the Iyengar, I think that's one of the special things about the BKS Iyengar yoga practice is that there are times you can spend an hour doing just 3 asanas. And
Yes.
it's so effective, it's still so potent, it's so slow, it's like it's teaching you patience without expectation, but through an asana. It's so beautiful. So thank you
Yes.
so much.
And the irony is it takes a little bit of skill to do nothing.
Yes.
Especially when we've been hardwired into thinking we need to be doing something. So you're exactly right. We can use these at the time of menstruation, but really for a woman or anyone, but I'm talking specifically about women, just to have these as part of your repertoire for during pregnancy, when you're missing out on sleep because you've just had a baby. If you're going through menopause symptoms, that can mean you have very poor sleep because of maybe hot flushes in the night, then this is a wonderful thing. You might want to do a little, half a dynamic practice, some Surya Namaskar, some standing postures, and then finish with a couple of these restorative postures. I've been practicing Ashtanga yoga for almost 20 years now, but it doesn't look like the full primary series, a full second series every day. It varies, like I say, depending on where I am in my cycle. And to have that acceptance and know that that's okay is a huge thing, because I see a lot of women suffering from guilt and unuseful emotions connected to their yoga practice, because we're
I understand, because there's so much pressure also, that pressure, I mean, I guess it comes with experience, right? It comes with experience, and I hope we all get that, because that's a beautiful place to be. Self-acceptance is happiness.
Yes.
There's contentment in that.
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of women that I know I have a lot of students during menopause. This restorative is very, very useful, very, very important. But I will also add that the more work we do in establishing the relationship with our cycle, the younger we are. So I found out this wisdom in my 40s. I wish I had it in my 30s. I wish I had it in my 20s. That's why I feel so passionate about sharing it. The entry into menopause will be smoother in terms of physical symptoms, and it's really an initiation into greater power as a woman, which is not the way society has us view getting older. So we really need to flip this and just, honor the wise women that are, that we can all look forward to that stage in life rather than dreading it. I'm personally very excited, but I feel excited because I've got this sadhana, this menstrual cycle awareness as a sadhana to help guide me into those years.
And that's beautiful. That's what yoga is for. So when we apply it, we realize just how many innumerable benefits this practice has. It's manifold. But thank you so much for this evening. And since everyone's so calm, let's just end the session on a calm note. Kotiji, will you please share if anybody would like to get in touch with Nea, or if you're in Dubai, that's the website, Nilaya House. That's Nea's Shala in Dubai. It's in the chat. Everyone can have a look. That's the website. Before we leave, any words of advice, any last message you'd like to share with us, Nea?
I think that when I first started Ashtanga yoga, that was a gateway. What I didn't realize, it was a gateway into dinacharya, into lifestyle practices. And what I realized is just that one small thing of getting up each morning to do a yoga practice had a flow-on effect to the rest of my life in terms of when I slept, when I ate, all these things. So sometimes we can get overwhelmed and think we have to make all these changes. We have to do this, we have to do that. But sometimes it's just that one little thing that one shift that then has a flow-on effect. So I would like to say for this menstrual cycle awareness, the first step is using your entrance being in the time of menstruation, adjusting the style of practice, honoring that bleed time, and then see what unfolds after that. That's the gateway to the deeper journey.
Most beautiful words to end a beautiful session. Thank you so much, Nea. And also thank you to everyone who joined. And I will see you all again next week for our next Yoga Insights session. Nea, thank you so much. Sending you much love from the entire Indica Yoga family. Thank you. And I'll see you all next week. Namaste.
Thank you very much, Viḍyā. Thank you so much.